everyone, and welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. Anybody who's watched before or anybody who knows of The Doctor knows just how thrilling it is when the book post arrives and you are introduced to a new author. And you just think, I need to get to know more about the author who has put this amazing novel together, because there are so many thrilling aspects to today's novel that we're going to discuss. And so I'm hoping that the author won't mind at all if we tease lots of different things out of this novel. Now, the novel in question is A Killing in November, and as you can see the author's name there, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Simon Mason into the consulting room as we have a look at this. I have to say, it's a beautiful read. There are certain aspects of it that make you stop and think and consider as a reader about your attitudes and the unconscious bias that you might have about things, but I think you write so beautifully, and it's one of those books that doesn't seem to want to be put down. The bags under the eyes may attest to that. Simon, an award-winning author, and we'll talk about the different styles that you've written. But A Killing in November, how are you feeling about this novel? What does it mean to you?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. That's so lovely of you. What does it mean to me? Well, it's not the first book I've written. So, you know, I've written a number of books before. I started off writing what you might call literary novels, and then I had children, so I started writing for children. My books for children grew up just like my children, just lagging a few years behind until I was writing for young adults, and then I'm back now with this book writing for adults again. So I haven't done this since the 1990s, but it feels like I've come full circle in some ways. But this for me is a big new departure, because I haven't written crime for adults before. My young adult books, three of them were crime novels, but this is for a different audience, an adult audience, with a new publisher. So, and it's a crime fiction loving world that I don't know anything about. I mean, this is a big adventure for me being talking to you. It's fantastic. So I'm sort of excited. I'm a bit nervous. I'm wondering where it's all going to go, but I'm liking it very, very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm sure even in this, you know, having dipped your toe into this aspect of crime writing, you know, as you mentioned, you know, the YA writing, but now into this sphere, I'm sure you're going to have a most wonderful experience. You know, it's a world, I think, where readers, authors, bloggers, Instagrammers, you know, people are so passionate about fabulous crime fiction, wonderful tales, great characters. So, you know, I think your book and yourself are just going to have so much excitement in this. Anyway, in November, 12 months in the year. Why November?
That's a good question. Actually, it's quite a difficult question with a slightly left field answer. My working title for this book throughout was simply Ryan, which is the name of the main character. And for me, I mean, the book might be about a number of things, but the most important thing for me that it's about is the character Ryan. And so I had Ryan in my head as the title, and my publisher said, "You got to be kidding."
Yeah, no.
Ryan, it's not a crime novel. Ryan doesn't sound like a crime novel. Who's interested in Ryan? So I had to choose another title, and it took me ages. It took me ages and ages, and I kept coming up with ideas, and they didn't like any of them. And in the end, I thought, I'm going to be quite plain. It's got to sound like a crime novel, so I'll put a word in like killing. And then for me, when I'm writing a book, how can I put this? The the sensuous facts of the book, the place where it's set, the weather that happens, what people look like and sound like, those sorts of impressions are important. And a part of the writing of the book had been setting it quite carefully in November. I wanted just that feel of the weather in November going on behind the action. So A Killing in November, it's a plain title, but that's where it comes from.
Wonderful. And you know, as you say, I think that atmospheric element of the writing just lends itself, you know, the chill that is there in what happens, as well as the background chill. It fits very, very well. It says again on the top, a D.I. Ryan Wilkins mystery. D.I. Wilkins. Now, I have to confess, when I first started, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, because you do that thing that makes sure that we're paying attention as readers, because you bring in two detectives, both Detective Wilkins, but one's Ryan and one's Ray. And I thought, again, that was really tricky of you. You know, one of them could have been Brian, but no, then Ryan and Brian, it would have no. Your premise behind that, the reason for giving us that almost duality, what were you wanting to do with that?
Well, it's a very good question. There were two things, really. One is, in terms of storyline, I wanted to begin with a mix-up between two very different sorts of detectives. One of them ought to be called out to investigate this murder, but the message gets confused and goes to the other Wilkins, and he goes out by mistake and finds himself in a situation he finds very difficult. So partly it was a plot line thing, but partly this duality that you talk about is important in terms of, I think, the book, or as I saw it, the book's themes, because it's a book of contrasts between two different things in different ways. And the two Wilkins that you talk about, one of them, Ryan, grew up on a trailer park. He's what you would call, or some people would call, a chav. He looks as if he ought to be a member of the criminal classes, not a detective. He's got no manners at all. He has a problem with elite, stuck-up, posh people, right? That's Ryan. And then Ray is the polar opposite. So that's the contrast I was going for. Ray is Nigerian heritage, London educated, private schools, went to Balliol College, Oxford, got a boxing blue and graduated with a first in PPE. He's suave, he's sophisticated, he's assured, he's a snappy dresser, right? So I wanted these two detectives to be chalk and cheese, basically.
And again, you know, in these, right there with this dynamic, the tension is already bubbling. I mean, it can't but do that. But I think, again, you know, the danger that they might slip into cliche, I think you worked very well to avoid, you know, that between these two guys. Now, for somebody who's only ever visited Oxford once, and I apologize for that, because more visits should have been done. But of course, and my watching of Morse, Oxford to me is very much a certain kind of place. But your book demonstrates that for many of us, what we see on TV or what we read, you know, most of the time, there's a different Oxford. And again, you could have avoided that maybe in writing the story. I don't know. Why was it important for you to show that there's more than one Oxford, shall we say?
Well, to be honest, in the beginning, I was slightly wary of setting it in Oxford. It's not exactly an original move, you know. You mentioned Morse, but lots of other crime novels set in Oxford. It's known for the crime novels that are set in the city. But then I live here, and I know it. It's handy, right?
Yeah.
So partly it was a reflection of the fact that I'm a writer that tends to write about what's around me. I mean, that's why I wrote children's books when I had children, because I was occupied with watching children, listening to children, reading to children, seeing how they interact and so on. And so I thought, well, look, writing about Oxford might be a sensible thing to do because I know about it. And then I do think that Oxford is a place of contrasts, because it has this well-known image that you point out, which is university-led, but it's not just the university. It's about wealth, it's about elitism, it's about entitlement in a way, it's about assurance, and it's about power. You know, and the university in particular is not only a wealthy institution, but it has strong and deep connections with government, with media, not just in this country, but all over the world. And yet at the same time, there are areas of the city of Oxford which are among the most deprived in the country. So Blackbird Leys, Barton, Rosehill, these are all areas that if you look at the stats and the rankings of regions which you can find, you know, anywhere online, they are among in the bottom 20% of regions. And you see this in Oxford. You might not see it if you're a tourist, and you might not see it if you're a student and you're in college lots of the time. But if you go just a little bit out of the centre, you see areas that are run down, and the housing is very cheap, and it looks a bit rough, and it's a problem of inequality. And so in the end, what Oxford is a symbol of, I think, what we have at the moment more than we've had before for a long time, which is this terrible issue of inequality. And I do feel passionately that needs to be, you know, it's talked about a lot, but it needs to be talked about and put right.
Yeah, I hold with you 100%. And I've said this to other authors before, and I think this is one of the fabulous things about crime fiction. Okay, so these issues that are problematic, but you know, the platform of crime fiction allows us just to stop a minute without being, you know, without having to listen to a political speech or without having to read, you know, a hefty tome. It allows us to, whoa, yeah, issues that I need to go back to, or issues that I need to consider. And you do that with a number of the issues, though, that you raise in this book. I mean, it's again, you know, it's a tapestry of, can you wake up and can you stop and think about what is going on? And one of the issues, again, that struck me was how you raise the Syrian Civil War. I think it's very easy for us, there's so much, you know, wanting our attention, that these issues can be left behind. Is this something that is very close to your heart?
The Syrian Civil War, not so much, but I don't think about it so much, but it should be very much a part of our thinking. We're all part of the world, but I agree with you absolutely about crime novels being a very natural sort of vehicle for exploring these sorts of issues. And I to be honest, I hadn't really realized that before I started writing. But with something like the Syrian Civil War, it sort of fell into place just by looking at the university, because the university has all sorts of donors from all around the world who pay for institutes and in the university. And sometimes they're very controversial sort of figures from abroad whose human rights records are maybe not so brilliant. At the same time, the university is in lots of ways a very caring institution. And they go out of their way, for instance, to employ refugees. And so suddenly the problem is right there at the heart of the university, refugees from the Syrian Civil War, at the same time as the university trying to get money from you know, wealthy people involved in the Syrian Civil War. So it emerged out of the very storyline that I was thinking about.
Beautiful. I'm also a firm believer that there are stories that are wanting to be told, and that people like yourself, you know, tap into that seam and the story comes out. And for me, it was one of those, just those moments of, yeah, come on, go back and think. Just to come back to the crime, though, and again, I love the cover of the book because it gives us so much information to start with, and it says a double murder. So could you give us a little bit of detail about the two different murders that you present us?
So yes, there are two murders. The first murder, or the murder that's first discovered, is comes directly from an anecdote told to me by a friend of mine who was employed as a handyman at one of the colleges. And I don't want to give too much away, but the anecdote involved a topless model. And so I thought, that's a very striking thing to have happened. So this is something that happened in the college he was working in. And it stuck in my mind. And I was when I was thinking about this particular novel, it suddenly occurred to me that I could use it, and that the person who figured in the anecdote could be the first victim. And because of the nature of the anecdote, I'm being careful here and not trying to give anything away. Because of the nature of the anecdote, people in the college would not know who this person was. So the identity of the person, because of what had happened, would be totally secret. The second murder that happens is I wanted it to appear like it was the logical consequence of the first murder, although it turns out it was not. It was the original intention, and so I was there. I was trying to do what other writers do so brilliantly, which is go in for some misdirection. I wanted the two murders to be really strongly linked, but not in the way that they appeared to be at first. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
Thank you, and thank you for not giving too much away. That was very well done. The setting then of this Oxford College, of course, you create a fictional college, do you not, for this? There isn't a Barnabas. Don't know. And was that your intention, to avoid any
Yes.
problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did think at first of setting it in a real college, and very quickly realized that if it was a real college, even if I wasn't going to cause offense or get into problems, I would be thinking about that all the time. It'd be in the back of my mind. And I think as a storyteller, it's like the issue of research. You want to do enough research for your purpose, but not too much research that inhibits the story. And so similarly, I didn't want to set in a real Oxford College, not just because I would be maybe accused of saying certain things about the college, but because I wanted the story to go wherever it seemed to want to go.
Yeah. I'm a wise decision, I think, because any kind of restriction, either that internal censoring, or that people come along and say you can't talk about that in regard to this, but if you create your own space, and then you have that freedom in which to create whatever mayhem you wish.
Yes, no, exactly. That was exactly it. I put it in a place in the city centre where you could, if you knock down some buildings, squeeze it in. And so I wanted it to be fictional, but I wanted, as it were, the fiction to fit inside the reality. And I also hope people don't think, oh, well, it might be a made-up college, but it's clearly meant to represent exactly what the colleges are like. I mean, that's not the case. Where I talk about the university as the university, I am making real points about the way it's connected with power, about the wealth that it has, and so on. But the actual fictional college, Barnabas Hall, and the way it's run, and the provost who runs the college, I'm not trying to say all heads of colleges are like this person. I've created, I hope, the freedom to create a completely fictional character.
I would say you have, which is lovely, and I'm sure no one will say I recognise that verse. No. In the way that the story runs with regard to the two detectives, could you give us a little bit of insight into, they end up working together, these polar opposites. How does the collaboration go?
Not very well to begin with. And Ray is very suave and sophisticated, and crucially, he has been an undergraduate at Oxford. He sort of knows this world, and he is quite instinctively polite, and I would say a little bit deferential. And Ryan from the trailer park is of course the polar opposite. He doesn't know the world, but he really doesn't like it, and he's not bothered about showing that he doesn't like it. He's going to treat these people with a little bit of contempt. And of course, his superior is the superintendent is pretty dismayed that Ryan should behave in this way. But that's part of the drama, that you have the tension between Ray wanting to conduct the investigation in one way and Ryan wanting to plow ahead in a completely different way. I wanted also, though, with the two characters, to try and explore them as characters, because the stereotype of Ryan, the trailer park boy, would be not only he looks like a chav and his manners are terrible, but probably also he's thick, he's uneducated, he can't articulate what he's thinking. He's probably got a kid and doesn't care about his kid. He's probably off his face most of the time, all these sorts of things. So I wanted to think through that a little bit, and he's very bright, my Ryan. He's sharp. He might have done drugs in the past, and certainly his former partner did, but he's changed his life. He's turned it round. He has a young son who's about 2.5, and they're very close. And he can be careless, but essentially he's a very big-hearted father who thinks about his son a lot. And then I wanted the link to Ray to be through children as well. So Ray and his wife can't have children. They're trying really hard to have children, but that's a source of tension in their relationship. So you've got Ryan as a single father, you've got Ray as a childless father, and I wanted to make those sorts of more personal and intimate contrasts between the two characters, as well as the sort of contrasts that come out in the storyline of the investigation.
Just to come back to Ryan as well, I think what the aspect that I enjoyed was again the idea of of stereotypes, and how he brooks that stereotype because he so easily could have been on the other side of the law.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah,
and that to be able to say, what happens to you in life, yes, of course it has its influences, and of course it's not easy to maybe go against the flow of things, but Ryan shows that this is possible.
Yeah, that's right. And I thinking about it, I think quite a lot comes down to manners. We look at someone like Ryan. He's got no manners. He hasn't got any manners. He shoots his mouth off. He insults people. He just says what he thinks. He's got no manners at all. But our assumption sometimes is that person obviously can't think straight. They're thick. They're bigoted. They're prejudiced. They're probably racist. A whole load of assumptions follow on from the fact that someone's got no manners. I don't believe that in real life is the case. Someone might not have manners, but might be incredibly kind-hearted. And it's part of a problem in political discourse, I think, that we get angry with people who don't believe the things we do. We think because of that, they're not nice people, they're not good people, they ought to be ostracized or punished or something. And we need to be more empathetic, basically, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, the idea of being willing to listen as well. Because I think, and on certain issues, I could well be accused of falling foul of this, but the need to hear those different points of view, to be able to understand why people take the actions they take, hold the views that they have, because without dialogue, then is there ever going to be a way of finding a way forward together?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think, you know, recently Norway inviting the representatives from, you know, from Afghanistan to come over and talk, and some people saying, how can you let those people in the country? And yet the attitude said, yeah, but if we don't talk, yeah. I think you raise some enormous questions via this story. Beautiful. Fatherhood as well, and the importance of fatherhood. I loved how you brought that in. You know, the character of the single mother is not, you know, he's not an unusual character. We've had it for many decades, but to have a character that is a single father and watch this father, warts and all, but be a good dad, you know, it's really refreshing, and heartwarming at the same time. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad you thought so. And I wanted Ryan to be a single father. That was part of the conception right at the beginning. But I didn't realize I was going to put his son in so much, because he is in quite a bit. I find with every book I write, there's one character who basically gate crashes the story. They just turn up in scenes they're not meant to be in, and they won't go away. And they sort of hold my attention. I can't quite stop writing about them. I can't quite cut them out. And Ryan Jr., Ryan's son is called Ryan. Ryan Jr., little Ryan, he was the gate crasher in this particular book.
And again, you know, in crime fiction, we don't often get, you know, that kind of character. So it was nice, I don't know, a refreshing aspect, which was good. You as a writer, and not only a writer, but you've been on the other side of that process. But I wanted to ask you, in what might be deemed a parallel career, do you feel that there are fors and againsts?
Yes, so my parallel careers began, you know, right at the beginning. As soon as I graduated, I started working for a publishing house, Oxford University Press, and I've been a publisher basically all my life. And certainly to begin with, that's what I did 5 days a week. That was my job, and I wrote it, you know, like lots of writers do, in the evening and at weekends. And only after about 20 years of that did I start to use some of the working week to write in. And now I'm in this different phase where I'm doing slightly more writing than I am. I teach at the moment rather than publish, but it's only very recently changed. So yes, my main career, I would say, is yeah, as a publisher. To begin with, my publishing was very different from my writing. So I was writing fiction, but my publishing was of non-fiction academic books, and then art books with Thames and Hudson, then reference books with a couple of American publishers. But then at one point in my career, I was beginning to write children's books, and my children's book publisher asked me to go and work at the publisher. So I became a children's book publisher at the same time as a children's book author. And then even more awkward, they were my publisher. So I would write a book and then I would deliver it to myself, which is slightly weird. And there was a real downside, I think, in a sense that as the children's book publisher, I was MD of an independent children's book publisher. It was part of my job to help decide what PR budget we should allocate to the different books that we were publishing. But I couldn't say, oh, I think this Simon Mason's book needs a lot of money behind it. So I had to say, you know, we should give it to someone else. And I'd feel slightly regretful. But those sorts of issues were slightly
Mm.
awkward. But as the broader, well, interpreting your question in a slightly broader way, I think I felt there is an advantage knowing the process from both sides of the table, as it were. I think a lot of authors, they don't know how an editor works or what the publisher's criteria are, and it helps an author to know that. I mean, generally the publisher is on the author's side, but they don't always explain what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's really helpful for an author to know that. And vice versa, I think, you know, publishers should understand how authors think and feel. It gives them a better insight into how the process, I think, should work. So on the whole, it has been an advantage for me, I think.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, knowing the way, you know, the authors that I do know, especially people who are setting out on their journey and wishing, you know, they say, oh, there's still so much I don't understand. I don't know what's needed. How do I approach a certain thing? And to have that, you know, that prior knowledge surely must help when you're sitting down to create. Although I liked what you said about, you know, I couldn't possibly, you know, say let's put money behind this, because it's like, you know, as opposed to, come on, this really needs a big push. Let's get...
If only I could have done that. Anyway, yeah, that was the only sort of awkwardness. But yeah, otherwise, I think it's an advantage, and partly it's about expectations. A lot of authors just don't know what to expect in the publishing process. They don't know simple things like, what sales should I expect? You know, how many are you going to print? 1 million copies? 100,000 copies? They have no idea.
Yeah.
But you might be only going to print 1,000 copies. And that information needs to get across. And I think both ways, authors to publishers and vice versa, so that expectations are very realistic and everyone knows the sort of deal that they're doing.
And again, just you as an author, having written in different genres, both fiction and fact as well, and I presume you have a similar process when you approach writing, but do you feel differently? Is there a difference in anything in the different genre that you have written?
Well, I suppose there are some differences, but there are also commonalities as well, of course. And when I started writing for children, it was very clear to me straight away that the worst thing in the world would be to dumb down the writing in some way and pretend that it needed to be very simplistic because children are just not so smart as adults. And my impression in actual fact is children are much smarter than adults. Their brains are so fresh and they're so quick at making connections in stories and understanding on a story level what's going on. But of course, the children have been around in the world less for less time than an adult, so they won't necessarily get all the allusions. They won't necessarily have known about the things that are in a story. You have to explain a little bit more to them, but that's not dumbing down. It's just been slightly more explanatory. And then there's the issue, which is a very contentious issue about what are you allowed to put in a children's book in terms of the content, the material. Thinking about, well, things that would be very central to lots of crime novels, sex and violence. When I was writing crime novels for a YA audience, I knew immediately I didn't want to put in the sort of sexualized violence that you might find in adult crime books. I wanted to concentrate much more on the mystery of the investigation and try and build tension and danger and narrative excitement in other ways. And then that is I think, an individual issue for each author. I don't think any author would say, oh, you can put anything in a children's book, it's no problem, I don't care. They wouldn't. They would draw the line somewhere, but everyone draws the line probably in a slightly different place. So there'd be some things I would put in a children's book. In the YA books, for instance, swear words. I think if they're used in a particular context and they're not I don't know, insulting or threatening, but maybe they're used in a comic way. I don't think there's, I wouldn't have a problem about putting those sorts of things in. But, you know, am I going to include a scene of, I don't know, anal rape or something? I'm really not, because I don't want to traumatize the reader. And I think anyway, in adult crime novels, that sort of detail is sometimes there to sensationalize, and it's not really a fundamental part of the story itself.
Yeah, very, very much so. And you know, and more, you know, I hear readers saying, you know, for me to be gripped by a crime novel, I don't need that kind, you know, of description. It's not necessary. You know, good writing, I think, doesn't need that sensational, elements. Yeah. Now, I have to ask you, and I hope it's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Oh my God.
But no. But you see, you've created these two detectives, and the book works perfectly as a standalone. You know, excellent, good. The ending, there it is, all lovely and neat. But surely, Simon, surely, you know, we have to see these guys again.
Yes, you will see them again. Yes. So the deal with the publisher was it was a 2-book deal to begin with. So there is another book which I've now written, which is coming out, I think the end of this year, or maybe it'll be this time next year, in January next year. And then I've just done a deal for another 2 after that. So
wonderful.
Well, who knows if
no
they'll be any good, but there will, I think, before at least. Yeah.
Good. I think it's that thing, you know, it reminded me of if you've been on a train journey or on a plane, you've sat next to somebody, you've really enjoyed the conversation, and then you get, you know, that journey comes to an end and you'll never see that person again. You think, gosh, you know, will destiny bring us back together to continue this kind of connection? So I'm glad that we will. That is wonderful.
Well, I'm very glad that you're glad. Thank you very much. But maybe I can just say that there's an interesting thing about series, actually, from a publisher and an author's point of view, because particularly in crime fiction, publishers are very aware of readers' liking for series. If they like the characters involved, then they want a series. So publishers set out with the expectation that it might become a series. So that's why I did a 2-book deal, and they wanted the second book quite quick.
Yeah.
But of course, it might not turn out. The big test is whether readers like it or not. But so publishers tend to say, we'll set out as if it might be a series, but we'll only start with 2 books and then we'll take a rain check.
Yeah.
And I think that's completely fair enough, and a sensible way of proceeding.
Definitely. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that, because you just don't know, do you? How will people react? What's the reading public looking for? Yeah. It's one of those tricky elements, I think. But I do hope that the detectives Wilkins, I hope that they I hope that they find much favour. I'm sure that they will. I have one last question for you. And very early on in the book, there's a description of the surroundings. The architectural detail is beautiful. Are you fond of architecture? Is it, or is it just that your powers of description are so good?
No, I am fond of architecture. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about architecture. I've got friends who are much more knowledgeable, but I do really love going around buildings and looking at them. It's partly for the sheer gorgeousness and my admiration for the accomplishment of these things that have been made. I love the idea of architecture, not just how it ended up, but also it's the result of a collective endeavor by a group of people all working together towards an aim, from the, you know, the patron through the architect to the masons to the unskilled laborers, who are all pitching in together to create these things. And I think in England, for instance, I would put in my top 3 of best things it has done ever would be the parish churches throughout the country. I just think I'm not a religious person, but as a collective social and artistic endeavor. And you know, Oxford is one of the great places on earth for medieval and later architecture. So yes, I did take a lot of inspiration, I suppose, in the book from the sheer scenery that's around me in Oxford.
It was an element, again, that I really enjoyed in the book. I felt like I got extra in the way that you wrote. So, Simon, wish you all the very best with A Killing in November and what comes after. Published by River Run and out at the moment in hardback and ebook. And are there plans for paperback as well?
Yes, and it's out at the moment in audiobook as well, actually.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I might say, although it's absolutely shameless boasting, although it's not really me, but it was audiobook of the week in the Times at the weekend. It's read by Matt Addis, who is learning Welsh, I noticed from his Twitter handle. So and he's done a brilliant job. So I'm deeply grateful to him. But yes, a paperback later on this year. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for our time together. Thank you for just being able to discuss this this first venture with Ryan Wilkins, and hope to see you soon. Bye for now, Simon.
Bye. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.